Today's topic we're going to talk about is kid engagement, retention, and church growing pains. So welcome everybody to the call today. So before we jump into the conversation, I would love to introduce our panelists. So when I introduce you, just wave at everybody so they know who you are. So I'm going to start with Chris. Chris Clausen is a children's pastor at Christ Wesleyan Church in Pennsylvania. He has served in his role at Christ Wesleyan for 1.5 years, but has been a children's pastor for 24 years. So Chris is a veteran. I met Chris at a camp, and he's amazing. Funny dude. Funny dude. Okay, so Doreen Garman, dear friend of mine, she's a children's pastor at Shady Grove Wesleyan Church in Colfax, North Carolina, and has been serving in that role at Shady Grove for 10 years. So that's the only church you've been in, correct, Doreen? Awesome. Linda, I met Linda at, I think, a pastor's gathering a while ago, but Linda is the children's pastor at King's Church Valley Campus, and Linda helped me say this, in
Quispamsis,
New Brunswick, Canada. I tried to practice that.
Outside of St. John.
Okay. Yeah. So she's been serving in her role for 20 years. So she's also a veteran kids pastor. They have 4 campuses, so she's helped serve the multi-sites and provide resources and support. So I'm excited to have Linda on our call today. Godfrey, I don't know if he's on. He texted me and said he might be a few minutes late, but Godfrey was on our call last week. He's the children's pastor at Park Place Wesleyan in Pinellas Park, Florida. He's served on staff. Oh, there he is. And then he served on staff for the past 2 years and has volunteered in kids ministry for, get this, 21 years. So amazing. I love it. And then Ethan Lampy, I don't think he's on yet. Ethan is at a Lego party at one of the elementary schools. So he asked if he could come late. And I was like, yes, of course you can come late. So he is the elementary pastor at Central Wesleyan Church in Holland, Michigan, and has served there for 8 years. So we have an amazing group of leaders that can help navigate conversations today. So please feel free to jump in. I'm going to kick us off with a question in the topic of kid engagement, and we'll stay here for about 15 or 20 minutes or however long you guys need to. So I'll start us off. So a big question that comes up a lot when I'm talking with kids leaders and kids pastors is this: how do you keep kids engaged when you have a variety of age groups in the same room? So for example, when I was a kids pastor, we had kindergarten through 5th graders together. So in the front of my room, the kindergartners were rolling all over the floor, right? And in the back of the room, my 5th graders were completely zoned out. Not because they didn't like me, but because of who they are, right? So how do we manage that? How can we keep those age groups in one space? If that's what we have, how can we keep them engaged? And then we'll kind of jump into some more questions.
First thing that popped into my head is when we added our Saturday night service, which is what drove me to start drinking coffee. So I didn't drink coffee until later in life, but was stations within a room, because I felt like it was really important that depending on the learning style of each child, that they had different variety of activities until we met together in the middle for the large group part. So we would have, and stations also kept kids from running, kept kids from getting out of the area that they were maybe playing in. And stations were really worked really well with younger kids, because an older child and a younger child could do, like, we had a Lego station for sure. We had a craft station. You know, there was an area over on one side where there was enough space to play a little bit of mini sticks, which is hockey, like with the little mini sticks, or soccer. And so I had a lot of stations that could be moved around, and I just felt that worked wonderfully because it was quite a mixed group on Saturday night. And I loved that. And they missed it. Of course, then COVID hit, right? And so then we weren't allowed to have anything that they were touching, that other kids were touching. But that worked really well.
Was that pre-service or like how did that work? Like were they stations for like play or were they stations like that went along with your lesson?
It would be both.
It would be
So
okay.
at the Lego station, depending on the theme, I would have, you can usually Google, like if it was a certain theme, then for Easter, there would be some Lego pictures of the tomb and the cross, and the kids would try and make some of those, or they would also go along with, and anything they made, we could display for everybody to see. The craft station usually had something that we would come back to as part of the activity, but then there would be an early arriver kind of activity. So they had dual purpose. So I wasn't like pulling and moving things and then having to reset up something else. So they worked really well. So then after, when we were waiting for pickup, you could use some of that again. And so it played different roles.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say sometimes too, it's just a matter of knowing that that is going to happen. And so there will be times when you're not going to engage everybody. So maybe just accepting that fact, but also then try to be strategic in how and when you do engage. When I've had multi-age groups, try to target more older kids than younger kids. Because if the older kids are behaving and connecting, oftentimes, not always, oftentimes then the younger kids will see that example and will follow along. If the older kids are super disengaged and vocal as they can be about it, then the younger kids will follow suit. I've also had situations where I've taken the older kids when they were like cool with it. Sometimes it depends, and have them help me maybe lead motions for a younger kid song, but then also make sure that in that music set that I included songs for the older kids that they would more engage with directly. So again, knowing your audience and knowing that you can't always get everybody, but aim for the older kids is what I usually try to do when I have mixed age groups.
Yeah.
I do that as well. I feel like the 3rd through 5th grade, especially the boys, if they're engaged, if they're listening, the younger kids are going to catch a lot more than we give them credit for. So I would rather preach up than preach down. And if they don't get it, they'll have more opportunities to do so. But just to find that balance, use the 3rd through 5th grade as leaders. Like when we look up scripture, often I'll say, you that are older, I see you've got your scripture. So how about helping someone younger than you? And, oftentimes they'll even sit together, just creating that environment where there's a mutual respect across all the ages. Same with my music. I probably tend to go more towards the older kids. The boys, girls are easy. Kindergartners, the younger ones, like they're just so happy to be there. You can do anything and they'll be happy. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
I also had stations at the beginning where there are different levels of games, but I try to incorporate a game for each level. But then usually when I'm finishing up, I'll do a group activity with the whole group. And so I'll have the older ones also assist the younger ones. So I kind of create a situation where the younger ones rely on the older ones for certain things, and then I kind of encourage the older ones to help out the younger ones. So, but I try to incorporate a group game that involves everyone.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
Even the seating in the room, I try to strategically, I tell them the best looking ones have to sit in the front, and that's the kindergartners. So, just not just so they'll sit. I want them to sit with the kids their age and build community there, but it's just a matter of, because we are all together for worship. We still have the traditional Sunday school hour, So that's when they're with their same age kids. And then when we're all together for kids worship, we're all together. But I try to have, and I have benches too, so they could fall off the big ones in the back. But, you know, just strategically putting them in certain, you know, locations in the room also.
Ethan just joined us. Wave at us, Ethan, so we can see you. He was at the Lego Club and we were all celebrating that you got to be in the local school. So yay, way to go. So okay, so let me ask one more question, then I'm gonna push it back up to you guys. So we talked about engagement, like different age groups. So we are up there teaching in front of a bunch of kids. What are some best teaching methods? Okay, so I have a degree in education as well, but not everybody does. And so help us understand some best practices on teaching to keep kids engaged. There's a difference, like I love all of the ideas that we just gave. So how do we do it when we're navigating the whole conversation and kids are sitting there listening to us?
Well, even if you just have a room full of one age group, you're still going to have a variety of learning levels, of comprehension, of, you know, their background. Some have more knowledge, some have nothing. I think a lot of it is like in your prep, preemptive. You know, if you got to be ready to go, got to be organized. You can't be running to the storage room grabbing something you forgot, or chaos will ensue. I think different mediums, short segments, you know, their attention span is short. I don't always do a video, but if I do, it's maybe a minute and a half, a portion of something, and then I'll reiterate it. Anything that can involve them, whether it's skits or them getting in a small group to do an activity or something, an object lesson. Love those, love the science experiments, even when they don't always work. But, you know, that's kind of my method is, as long as I walk in the door ready and excited. If I'm a fuddy-duddy on the stage, they could care less what I say. Sometimes I have to just be very dorky and obnoxious, and I can do that in front of kids. Don't ask me to do that in front of the adults, but yeah, it works for them. It might work for the adults too, but that's not where I want to do it. So,
yeah. Having that one thing in your back pocket just in case. Yeah, like I totally agree with that. Like you've just got to have, and telling stories. Like on Sunday we were talking about you know, sharing the good news, and I told them the story about how I was trying when I first gave my heart to Jesus, and I was telling my brother, and I was in university, and he was, you know, he was asking all these intellectual questions and wanted me to answer them, and I couldn't. And I said to the boys and girls, I said, guys, I thought I didn't share the good news at all, because all I did was I just got mad at my brother and started crying, and they were all staring at me. I said, yeah, because I wanted him to know it was the good news. And I felt really bad because I didn't share it very well. And I said, do you know what happened? And they were like, what? And I said, well, he gave his life to Jesus because he said, you started crying and you were so upset. And all I could see was, wow, he's real because he really matters to you. And I was, you know, telling them that story. And so a lot of times they know a lot about me, how I went off my bicycle and went over the handlebars without my helmet. And they know that I had a pet skunk. They know that too. And I use a lot of stories about my life when we're teaching, and they can usually, they remember those things the most, bringing it back to the Bible. Yeah.
I also try to engage them in as being part of the story whenever possible. So like this weekend, we were talking about the Last Supper. And so like everybody hold up, you know, like how many people were there? So it was Jesus and the 12 disciples. How many is that? And so all shouted 13, right? And there were two things that Jesus pointed out: the bread and the cup. Everybody hold up two fingers. So again, real simple, but in let them participate. There's an older book that I used a lot. It's called The Fabulous Reinvention of Sunday School. Aaron Reynolds.
Yes.
And again, he does just an amazing job of, again, helping you engage with the kids. So that's, I can put the title in the chat, I think, here in a second. But again, letting them participate in the lesson, in the story, even simple costumes or repeating a phrase or whatever it takes. Sometimes too, just varying your speech pattern and proximity too. So like if they're goofing around and my small group leaders aren't paying attention either, then during large group, I'll wander close to a kid. I actually called some out this weekend, like, hey, Charlotte, why aren't you paying attention? But again, just to get their attention, not in a mean way. I mean, I didn't yell at her. I just said, hey, pay attention. But also engaging them in participation.
I want to
Yeah,
mention,
very much agree with that. Oh,
sorry. For me, my volunteers are really crucial to this. All of the things that everybody said we try to do, but like from the part before service where everybody's just arriving, my volunteers are engaged with them at all of the different stations. They're building Legos and connecting with the young ones and the older ones, and they can do the same activity, but the volunteer is kind of who brings it together. And even in my teaching time, my volunteers sit, with the kids. Volunteers tend to want to stand in the back and watch it happen. And so I tell them, go sit by those boys who have a hard time paying attention. And my volunteers pay attention. Volunteers, you should be worshiping and doing the actions. Kids look up, whether my kindergartners are looking at my fifth graders or my fifth grade boys are looking at my high school volunteers, my boys that are cooler. When they see them engaging, that makes them want to participate too.
Yeah, great.
What I also do, if there's always that one that just is not engaged, I bring them up front with me and let them be my helper. So I said, okay, hold this for me. And there's nothing there, but I just get them busy so that they pretend that they think they're doing something, but they're really doing nothing. So I try to get them involved and engage them in my lesson. And with the part, and sorry for that sound. And even when I do I let them act out parts. I say, okay, you pretend to be this and show me out. So I try to involve them as much as I can.
Yeah, awesome. Ethan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, just affirming how important it is that you use your proximity with your students as well as vocal color as you teach. I mean, if there's something that's very exciting, make sure that your volume reflects that, your facial expressions, your attitude. And if there's something that's more somber, allowing yourself to kind of lower that level. Be a dynamic speaker for sure. I mean, on days where my students are less inclined to listen, I'm tempted to shout and be loud so that way they can hear. But that tends to escalate energy in the room itself. So trying to control the room with your volume and tell a story in an engaging way is huge. I would say narrative is a big one, personal stories, but also helping convince your students that the stories in the Bible are very exciting. There are really neat aspects to it, and drawing parallels to modern stories that they very much enjoy has helped a lot. So yeah, I've heard a lot of really, really great tips. And I think they're all worth practicing as well, which could be fun to see how your room reacts to your delivery. And back to the very first thing that was said, to prep is everything. If you're looking down at your notes the whole time, the kids know that you're not prepared, and they're going to reflect that in how well they listen to you. So preparation is absolutely key.
Yeah, and key for your volunteers too. For us to portray that to our volunteers that we don't just show up. We show up prepared. Yeah.
Can I ask too, do many of us teach in environments where we find our volunteers will substitute attending the main service for being present in the kids ministry, or do they serve one, attend one typically? Because it's important to remind ourselves as well that we might be the only person delivering the word to our volunteers on a given Sunday too. So your prep is important for their spiritual formation as well.
Yeah, such a great word. What questions do you guys have around kid engagement? I mean, I've got a list of them and I could go on for days, but I want to hear from you. Like, what are some of your questions that maybe these people could speak into? Okay, well, I have another one. I mean, I think it's a topic that everybody needs to talk about. Let's go into behavior a little bit because that has such a big, I mean, leading kids and leading adults, we don't have the same discussions. So we're not discussing adult behavior. And typically in youth ministry, we might some, but not in the same way. So let's talk about that. Because I believe it has so much to do with kid engagement and impacting the engagement of another kid that someone else is misbehaving and they're over here watching the kid misbehave while they're missing what you're trying to do. So talk to us about how do you handle this? Like how do you handle behavior? When is the right time to go to a parent? Um, do you have rules? Like how high is your behavior expectation? Like what does that look like in your ministry areas? So Taffy.
I feel like since COVID, like we have a lot of boys, and a lot of boys, families are coming even during COVID with boys because they're just having a really hard time and they're on the spectrum a lot. And so I feel like, it's a real cry for help, obviously, so we've got a big challenge, but yet it's such a blessing because I know that this is just an outward expression of something more that's deeper. And so I feel like, anything dealing with behavior starts from the time that you see them at the door. We really try hard to know that they are known and that their name, and that as they come in the door, it's like, hey, Gavin, I can't believe, man, have you ever grown? Like, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. That they're known, and that because some kids are acting a certain way because they're nervous. They have anxiety. Large groups of kids, just brings on a different kind of behaviors. We've learned a lot about really trying to have the kids know that they are seen and that they belong and that someone knows them and that there's a lot of grace and love. We're not going to obviously put up with things that shouldn't be happening, but they need to have some time too, and that they know what the expectations are, that the rules are, that they're not being called out on something that they just didn't know. So make the rules clear, let them know that they belong and that we're really glad to have them. And if we need to say something, we try to do it, like try not to do it in a big way that embarrasses people. That's why small group leaders sitting in with the kids is really important so that they can, kind of give a little nudge or just make their presence known. And that just kind of helps, to bring things around.
Yeah.
I think the clear expectations for each thing that you're moving to, we have social time and fun time prior to. And so sometimes there's just a point where I say, we've already had that time. This is our time for this morning that is dedicated to worship. And, not that during the worship time, there's not fun aspects, but to always keep that in mind, to bring it back to, is what we're doing worshiping? Are we playing? Are we distracting other people? Because that's incredibly sad when we've come here for this purpose to grow closer to him too. I think, and I taught school in the past too, rules and boundaries make no difference to them if you haven't built that relationship with them. I agree, like calling them by name. Now, I'll never remember. It takes me longer to remember the parents' names, and I'll tell them that. I'm like, I'm going to have to ask you multiple times. My focus is their children, that they know I love them. I'm so glad to see them. Making the expectations clear throughout, but building those relationships. I have the hardest time with new kids that come in because the rest, if you have that relationship with there's a measure of respect that they respect what you're doing and what you're trying to do because they know you love them because you have built that relationship with them.
Yeah, I would say that's a big aspect of ensuring that your guidance and occasionally discipline don't immediately cause a student to act out defensively. even with my own children, trying to remind my 6-year-old daughter, the reason that I discipline you and give you guidance is because I love you and I want you to grow in a healthy way. Um, and so part of that for me has been, yes, to make sure you establish a loving relationship right away, because you can't tell somebody, hey, I discipline you because I love you, when they haven't felt the love yet. So that there will be a disconnect in your words if that's how you communicate discipline, if you haven't established that relationship first. And then another thing too is I fall victim to this sometimes too when I'm trying to get a student to do something. I try not to convey that I want them to obey me more than I want them to obey a God. So communicating that the things that we're asking, I'm not asking. I'm trying to help you understand God's perfect law, God's perfect will, and I'm trying to guide you to follow it. So, trying to say, like, this isn't a Pastor Ethan rule. This is a rule that I'm following too. It's a rule that belongs to all of us. And yeah, maybe kids will resist that because, like, oh, God's a God of rules, and that's up to all of us, of course, to help communicate. God's goodwill, His good creation. But those are some important things that I consider when we talk about discipline, and to a degree too, it's all subjective. We can have a perfect system, and yes, making sure that your expectations and guidelines are very clear, because kids need structure, absolutely. Especially at home, kids are getting a lot less structure. Parents are a little bit more passive. There's more technology that's substituting parenting. And so the more clear expectations we can set for our kids, the better, and enforcing them is very important. However, if we know a student hasn't showed up with their meds, having taken their meds, or somebody showed up and they didn't get breakfast, a snack and some time aside can really help a child regulate. So yeah, I have a poster. I'm trying to find it so I can post it in our chat, that provides guidelines for our students, that just kind of lists of, like, hey, at Central Kids, this is who we are. This is what we do. I'll see if I can find it. I mean, I think it's pretty good, but if you guys like what you see, you can use
If
that.
you can, if you would just email it to me, I can throw it in an email this afternoon with the video recording. That'd be awesome, Ethan.
Okay, I'll see
I
if I can
love
track
how you said that you include yourself in following those, because I think sometimes they feel like coming down on them. So I think that's a really great way to do that. Any other questions on kid engagement? I mean, we could go on for days on all of this. But I want to jump. We've got a couple of other topics. Any other questions on kid engagement before we jump ahead?
I had a question about engagement.
Absolutely.
Someone mentioned first time. How do you engage with first time kids in the ministry? Obviously, you want to make them feel welcome, but what does that day look like, and even follow up?
Great question.
One of the things I do when I see a child that's new, man, I greet them at the welcome area, and I'm as crazy as they come. Sometimes they're shy, sometimes they're not shy. But I said, okay, I'll make little jokes. Okay, did you guys tell them the initiation when they come? And so I interact with the parents and them so that they can feel comfortable in coming back. And so the initial thing, I usually try to, if they're afraid at first, I let the parent, hey, you can come back with them. But I focus all my attention on those new ones at first and just try to get them comfortable until they're comfortable with one of the other children. And then I kind of back off. But I try to make them as comfortable as I can and as crazy as I can. And I can get crazy because I think they latch on to crazy sometimes. Not all of them. But if you try to be who you are and just love on them and show them that they need to be comfortable there, that usually works for me.
Try to get them hooked up with some other kids that are good at this. Like, I know my kids that have the gift of hospitality. I don't even have to ask them, and they'll say, come on, let's play, and they immediately, I want them to, I want to be as comfortable with them as possible. But that initial, when they're socializing, I try to get them with kids, and I'll walk around and say, oh, here's so-and-so. They're also in second grade. And they're making bracelets. Maybe you want to make some bracelets with them. Usually I kind of show them the space. I show them where the bathroom is and some of those things with a couple of the other kids. And then I'll try to get them to do something together. When we do like the worship time itself, we do take a minute to introduce them. And I'm certainly not trying to embarrass anybody. We do it really casually, but I bring them to the stage. And of course, I have a gift bag for them. I'm like, you got to, if you want the treats, trust me, there's some good stuff in there. Come on up. I introduce them. All the kids love talking in the mic. I've only had a couple new ones kind of just hesitate, but they'll tell me and then I'll share. But the kids, we always, after we just find out some basic, what grade are you in? Where do you go to school? What do you love about school that you love learning about? Not recess or lunch. Those are the easy answers. And then I let the kids ask them some questions. And I set it up like this. I said, we have some really important questions because we're super nosy around here, but it's because we want to get to know you. We want to know, just these are super serious questions. Oh, my lights just went off. Anyways, and we always ask 2 questions. They're really serious. That's what I say. What's your favorite ice cream? And so they share, and I'll say, who loves cookies and cream? And everybody's in the room cheering on whoever loves cookies and cream. And then the other question is, what's your favorite pizza? And they answer that, and we all cheer if we love pepperoni too, or cheese, or whatever they say. And actually last year I had a 5th grader. Every single time she would ask, does pineapple belong on pizza? And everybody would laugh. And of course, I think it's delicious, and a lot of them don't. And so they would tell me I'm wrong. And, she's now in the youth group, but there's always a kid in the room that asks that question. Like, they think it's the funniest question. I don't know why. And then we give them their treat. And I say to the kids, say welcome to Stephanie, and they all say welcome. And I'll make sure they know who the leaders are for the day. If they need any help, or if they're unsure where the bathroom is, that they can know who to go to. And I hope that alleviates some of their worries when it's their first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I could add real quick too. I mean, everything you guys have said, that's exactly what we do. If you're in a classroom, if you're available to welcome a student, meet them with their energy is a big one for me. I'll be wild and crazy with my upper L kids and be very enthusiastic and welcoming. But yeah, sometimes, especially first time guests in lower L, you'll start to get kids who are really timid. They're very clingy. They might even scream or resist being dropped off at their classroom. Those moments are a little trickier. If I have a student because I try to know my students as well as possible, certainly by name, but also understand who they are, if they're good at welcoming or not. If you just have a classroom, because sometimes you have a classroom where there's not a single student who you're like, yeah, they're going to step up. They're just not gonna. Then what I try to do is through asking questions about what a child will enjoy, and usually the parents around at that point too. Doing it at their level is great. Eye level, get down to their level. And if there's something that they do enjoy, and you have a fidget or a toy that they can have for them in that classroom, that's a big comfort tool right away that makes them more interested in staying in that classroom. So I'll try to hook them up with something that will help them feel comfortable, something that they own, right? Not literally own, but something that is theirs that they can use in the classroom. If I just don't have the students available. We also have a 5th grade leadership team. Those are students that know that on any given Sunday, I might need to grab them to welcome a student and be a buddy in a different classroom. And we have to account for that in our system to say, hey, they're in a different classroom. It's a little complex. It's kind of irritating, but we just need to know where our students are, so that helps a lot. And then our follow-up would be when a family registers for the first time, they will get a call or text from me. Most younger families, I will text. Depending on the age, if it's a grandparent, I'll give them a call instead. That's all, that's up to your discretion. Then we send them a postcard in the mail just saying, hey, it was great to have you. Bring this postcard back the next Sunday and we'll give you a gift. So that's kind of like they get a gift for their second Sunday. They'll get a message from Pastor Ethan, and then they'll get a postcard from Miss Heidi, who's my coordinator. So that's the system that we've put in place to make sure that families feel welcome. Yes, when they first arrive, so they feel comfortable to stay. But then also after they've come, they get a postcard, which is pretty exciting. They know, hey, I was glad to be had, and then they can get a gift when they come back the second week. So that's just our system.
Yeah, I think that takes us so well into the kid retention conversation, because I think there's been questions that are asked, is it necessary to have a system of retention? Or what does that look like? Do we track that? So how do we know if first time guests come back? and all of that? Like, what about second time guests? What about regular attenders? Are we like communicating with them? So let's talk a little bit about that. What about kid retention? Is it necessary? And if it is, or if it isn't, tell us why, or what do you do?
Well, I guess I'll start just because
Perfect.
I just finished communicating our onboarding process. I think retention is really important. Now, none of us can guarantee somebody will come back. It's as simple as that. And some kids come because they're on vacation, or they're, obviously those we understand that they're not going to come because they're from Ohio, or from, well, some of you guys maybe are from Ohio, but like from Virginia or Florida or wherever, visiting grandparents. But we do as much as we can to make sure a child knows they're celebrated, that they're loved, and that the families are communicated with, and then the rest is up to the Spirit, right? So we control what we can. We do our best to be welcoming, but then we also go, you know what? I can't guarantee somebody who comes is going to stay. They may have a theological difference. They might have, they might be looking for something else. Our church is fairly large. My prayer is that our classrooms and our personability, it all feels small. It's a good community, but some people aren't looking for that, and that's okay, because large and small churches, medium as well, all have their important niche in the kingdom of God. And thankfully our leadership says that too, like, hey, as long as your systems are in place, your people are doing, they're passionate, they're doing what they should be. We don't, we're not going to threaten your job if somebody who comes doesn't want to come back. That's, there's nothing we can do. But it's nice to know how many people are coming, how often they're coming. Sadly, it seems regular attendees. That definition doesn't mean what it meant in the 90s, where it was 4 Sundays a month, sometimes 5. Now it's like 3-ish. Yes, our hope is that people will come not just every Sunday, but then multiple days a week, which of course that's different too from when I grew up. Retention I think is very important. The process, that first impression is very important, but it's not everything, right? We can't place all of our stock in ministry success on whether or not somebody we really wished would come decides to come, because in the end it is a movement of the Holy Spirit and God is at work. We need to trust that He's doing His work. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it's important, but you can't hang your hat on how perfect your system is, or whether or not you have a complex system. Simple systems can work really well too.
This isn't directly related to retention. I mean, it is sort of. I had a executive pastor once that, hey, you need to do more big events, because then kids will invite their friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like on Sunday mornings, do more big things. And I'm not opposed to doing big things or lots of fun and energy and all that stuff at all. But because I had data and I was able to track it, I was able to show him that families, even if we did a big, like slime Pastor Chris Sunday for whatever the reason, that I could show in the data, in the numbers, that sometime within the next 3 weeks, we would have the lowest attendance of that time frame. So like if we did it like the first of the month, and he really was pushing hard on that. And again, we scheduled fun days and all that kind of stuff, but because of the data and the numbers, I was able to show him that those are good things, but they're not doing what they used to do or what you think they would do. Because families would, what I would hear anecdotally is, yeah, we sort of gave you our time. We made sure we were there on that Sunday so our kids could experience that sort of peak Sunday, but it didn't lead to retention or more people coming back more often.
And I think that's because it lacks the personal touch sometimes. I mean, we have the big festivals and things, and I'm running around the whole day trying to make those personal connections. And when I do, those are the people I see again. If there's not a personal connection, then, that's just, it doesn't happen. We try to approach follow-up as a family or to the entire family. And I share everything I get, because lots of times I get info that no one else in the church gets. So I try to send a card. I mean, I know it's old school, but every kid loves getting mail. So I send a card to the children. And of course, I've put and parents, or part of that card is if you or your parents have any questions with my business card. My senior pastor typically sends the family an email, and then our connections pastor will send a text. And if they return, then the next week, she might call them. I'm trying to get them to join our Facebook page so they can kind of see the other things that we have going on. Even the form that they fill out, it is, do you want to be included on these emails, whether it's Wednesday, whether it's Sunday ministry, whether it's the whole church communication, and go from there. Like, immediately try to find them on Facebook. And if they're willing to Facebook or be my friend, then I'll invite them to our private, kids ministry group. So that's what we do. Some of it's old school, but they love getting mail. Love it. And I handwrite the note. It's just.
Listen, we need to do more of that. More old school, the better, in my opinion.
And for regular kids, if they, I don't check the attendance every single week. Like, I don't go through my computer program, my check-in program, but I remember those kids that I'm not seeing. And especially if I haven't seen them in 2 or 3 weeks, then I'll send them a card. I don't want them to feel like I'm like, where have you been? Kids don't, they don't have any way to get to church anyways. It's more of the parents, but building parent relationship with those parents, even texting them and saying, I'm missing your kids. I hope everybody's okay. Like, maybe they've been sick, maybe they've been on vacation, but either way, they know that you've been thinking about them. And almost always the next Sunday they're there. Now, maybe not the Sunday after that, because attendance is, like Ethan said, very, just hit or miss these days. Unfortunately, it's not like it used to be, but.
Anyone else? Any other questions in the kid retention? I think we've had some great conversation. Doreen, you just said something about connecting with the parents. I think that is such a big deal. When parents know that their kids are missed, we can tell that to a kid, which we should. But when a parent knows their kid is missed, that's a whole different thing. So reaching out to both is a great idea. I love it. Anything else in this area?
I was just going to say, we do, it's probably once a quarter. We do, it's called Pizza with the Pastors. It's immediately following the service, where, and our connections pastor, she's so good at keeping track, and she and I sit together. She makes sure she has all the children. Because we do this weekly, but when we sit down to invite, which we personally invite them, because no matter how many times we announce it, it does not matter. She calls every one of them and invites them. And goodness, for the last couple of years, so many of these, we meet after church. They can, it's just pizza and salad, and we go around to all the tables, and all the ministry leaders are there. We introduce ourselves and the new families. And I'm very pleased to say, a lot of times it is families. It's sometimes there's some, families that are older without children and stuff, but a lot of times it's families that are there so they can meet who the youth pastor is, the lead pastor, all the different, and we try to present as a very united staff, which I believe we are, but, and that's good for them to see too.
Also, real quick, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I think another retention strategy too is working on your transitions. So depending on how you have kids broken out and youth broken out, so transitions sometimes between the early childhood, elementary, and the elementary area, and then the transition between kids and youth ministry. That's a great time to focus on retention and your connection process there. And so again, one of the things we do to help that process when moving into youth is the month before our 5th graders go to youth group, because we have youth group on Sunday morning as well. And I take the 5th graders down to the youth room on Sunday mornings. So we start in the kids, go to youth, and then end in kids. but during that time, that way they go down with a group and they're not the only person, or think that they're the only person that is going to be in youth group that they know. So just transitions are a key point for retention as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I second that for sure. You don't want to lose people in transition.
Yeah, and it can happen very easily.
I find
awesome.
with those events, like transitioning from pre-K to elementary, so we do the back to school pop-up Sunday, and I feel like that really does help parents to realize if they're not being intentional, because in the fall is when they start thinking about what are we going to do for this year, that we're reminding the parents, you know, this is the time, let's get the family there, make it a part of your scheduling so that they understand when the church services are, that they understand when youth happens. Ours happens on Monday nights, so that the teens know, and they're not, the parents haven't scheduled, you know, karate on Monday nights. Like that happens. But if the parents don't know that youth is on Monday nights, if we're not communicating that, by the time they're in fourth grade, that's going to happen, right? So helping the elementary parents to know what's coming for their middle schoolers, and that everybody's talking, working together, because we are supposed to be partnering with parents to help set them up with resources. But if they don't know the information and they're so busy, you know, we can make the steps smaller so that they're not going to miss out. Here's just a reminder, you know, kids camp is happening. You're not going to want to miss kids camp. I know your kids go to soccer, but I also know everybody goes on vacation, and you tell the coach, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Your kid will not want to miss kids camp. It will change their life. They will remember this. And so for you to say, hey, we're going to go to kids camp the next 3 nights, that's our VBS, instead of going to soccer, because it matters. So you're helping the parents be able to set the trend for the transitions that are going to happen down the road. If they don't pick it now, when their kids want to be there, when their kids don't want to be in church, and then they're asking you to have a relationship with their middle schooler and they don't even know you. Mm-hmm. Like, this is the time to set up when the kids want to be there and to set them up to win.
Building a good relationship with your youth pastor where he is either in your space often, or someone said in the chat, you know, their 5th grade and how she encourages leadership. And I do the same. And I actually kind of got stuck after COVID for lack of volunteers teaching the 5th grade class. And I love it. I love it now, you know, and, you know, it kind of hurts sometimes when they're so happy to move up, but I try to encourage them. It's going to be great. This is, you know, you've kind of received all that you can here. You're ready for more. You're ready. And I encourage them, you know, I want to see you go to youth and thrive and grow even closer to Jesus, you know. And last Sunday, we actually had we have a new youth pastor. And so they're very nervous. They knew our old youth pastor very well. And so we've been talking about serving and what it looks like to be called to ministry, missions, all that. And he actually served on the missions field for 4 years in his teenage years. And so he came down, and we did ask him like official questions about missions, but they had so much fun. Just like they kept trying to get him to say funny phrases in Spanish, because, you know, he knew Spanish. And I always try to encourage my youth. It hasn't always been this way, but our prior youth pastor, when his son got to a certain age, he had to go to youth camp with him. And man, that made such a difference. I mean, he had to go to kids camp with him, excuse me. And it made such a difference. And so like my 5th grade boys, they already knew him, loved him, and they were somewhat upset for him to leave. So when our new youth pastor came down Sunday, I was like, let's talk about camp, you know, like Pastor Barry's going to be there with us, and, you know, tell him some of the fun things we do. And, you know, opening like that week that they spend with him at camp is just huge on that transition to the youth. And I just think knowing the youth pastor and the kid pastor are hand in hand working towards the same thing, and that transition is so important. We do a transition thing too. After their last kid thing is kids camp, and then we do like a pizza hangout. It's for 5th graders only, like no one else is allowed to come. And we hang out in the student center, and they get to play some of the games. They get the Nerf guns out. And then we sit around and talk about what is it going to look like And we always include a few middle schoolers as leaders to come because they know them from years past, you know, when they were in Kidman. And so they're so ready to go. I'm like, I guess I'm glad you're ready to go, even though it kills me to see them go. But I want that, you know, I want them to be comfortable going to the next level.
Off of the transitions and then the youth pastor relationship, Ethan might know our new youth pastor because we took him from Central. But we hired him on last spring, and he's very young and it's his first time doing this, but we were able to work together with our 4th and 5th grade and 6th grade with the youth. And what we do is all year long, we have our 456, our 4th through 6th graders and our youth have combined events. Like we have a huge one for Thanksgiving, and it was a huge success this year where we had a whole bunch of activities that were good for 4th through 12th grade. And we intentionally have them all together, sit together at tables and mix in and do all that so that they can meet each other. And we've noticed in years past that 4th and 5th grade are the time that the kids start to not come anymore because they feel too old or too cool for Kidman. And so we created this separate ministry for them that was geared toward them. And so how we transition them from 3rd to 4th is we have those kids do VBS still as kids. They participate in the Christmas program with the little kids, but their Sunday morning is completely separate. And then we have a big celebration Sunday, the back to school Sunday, where they all move up and our 3rd graders go to 4th. And then those events for this, well, 6th is going back to youth now, so it will be the 5th graders next year. But when they're moving up, they get all of those points throughout the whole year meeting middle school and high school kids where they're going to be more comfortable with that. And I'm hoping to bring the youth pastor to our camp because we go off-site for a full week, separate from VBS, for camp for 4th and 5th grade. So hoping to have him as a leader, and then they're more comfortable seeing him when I'm not there anymore. So, yeah.
I love how you do that, Shelley. Just like I saw so many kids drop off after 5th grade, and I would go to the youth pastor and say, is so and so, you know, here? And no, haven't seen that. You know, so like creating those bridges constantly and making them feel comfortable before they even have to get there. Awesome.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah,
awesome.
we have almost currently no 7th and 8th graders because during COVID, those 4th and 5th graders never came back after COVID because they were like, we don't want to be in children's ministry anymore. And they just didn't have to, even though they were in 4th grade. And that's when I kind of came on. And then I came on 2 years ago and we started this ministry for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade to bridge the gap. And like, that's our defining thing, is bridging the gap. So
it's awesome. All right. So let's jump into our last one. Okay. Growing pains. Great conversations today. I know this is going to be so helpful for so many. So as I was thinking about growing pains, I think a lot of times we think about growing pains as, okay, we're growing exponentially, or, you know, our attendance is increasing and my rubber band is getting stretched really far. And I can't keep up. That's one part of it. There's another part of growing pains where it's slow and you want to grow and you're not seeing the results. So that's a pain for sure. So talk a little bit about, maybe you've experienced one or the other. What does that look like for you? Some of those pain points, I kind of listed those, like exhausted leaders, transitional leaders, budgets, scarce volunteers. So like, let's talk about that. Can you speak to growing pains and the types that you've experienced, and help that be an encouragement for our leaders?
Well, can I first start by asking which pain are people feeling right now? I'm not trying to get into a comparison game, but I saw right now I'm reading a book. It's called The Great Dechurching. It's really, really incredible. It talks a lot about post-COVID trends, large, medium, and small churches, what they're experiencing as far as how they grow and with whom they grow. So is it, you know, people moving from a different church, or is it, you know, folks who've fallen away, or been lax with their faith since COVID. But like for us, a lot of the people that we're getting, um, some of them are a traditional first time guests where it'd be like a seeker level family who, they need community support, they need spiritual resources, and they see how important these things have become in the wake of COVID, where a lot of families are struggling. Like that's a type of person. We're getting fewer of those than we are getting from families who maybe we're feeling under resourced, or their church actually closed. And basically all that's happening are people are in our area are consolidating from more churches to, higher attendance of fewer churches. And that's not because the bigger churches were any better, but because they survived. So we're seeing a lot of families who are jumping in, who are churched, who have faith bases. And that seems to be more like a 70-30 ratio of new families to faith who are looking for spiritual education, and a family whose church closed or their children's ministry floundered, which is really sad because they deserve support. But what are you guys seeing? What do your growing pains look like in this season?
This sounds crazy, but for us, we're starting to see people that jumped online after COVID just starting to come back. We had another family, they haven't been back in our building for 2-3 years, and they were back this Sunday. And you probably get a couple of those a month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We found that absolutely true as well. The timing is right about the same the past 8 months or so. But we found elementary families were coming way sooner than preschool families were in our preschool and nursery. It took those families longer. I think naturally there are more health concerns with the younger kids, but that's very much reflected in what we have seen as well.
For us, it's that, but it's bringing classrooms back in the mornings. So after COVID, before I came on, they opened up the second service, but not the first. And so we only had kids at the second. And in the last couple of years, there's been a push on like wanting all classrooms back for the first service, but I don't have the kids nor the volunteers to be able to staff or even fill the rooms at all. And so I've been slowly bringing back like one classroom at a time as I can get leaders and as parents come, but like the kids and families don't want to come because it's not there. And then when it is there, it's not full and exciting. There's only a few people, but it's not going to get full and exciting until they come. And so it's that whole catch-22 that we're going through right now.
Yeah. You can only recite Luke 16:10 so many times before somebody starts rolling their eyes at you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. We're kind of at the point where everything's open now. Like we have 2 services. We're doing 3 for Easter, but we have small groups. We have babies all the way up to grade 5. So we're probably 75% up to 75 to 80% are of what the number of kids that we had before COVID. Not the same families, obviously, but we're getting back up there.
Many of you who experienced losses during COVID, did you find this will be an interesting part of the conversation? Did you find that you lost families who had qualms about the policies that you enacted during COVID, and they went to churches whose policies they preferred, or that they fell away from church entirely?
Both.
Or do we even know? Or maybe, probably a mix of both.
Some of both. We actually had a pastoral change in 2020. So that added a whole other element to that, some families that left when he left. And then our new pastor came in and is very beloved. And so we are starting to see that growth come back. But there still are some families that have never come back since COVID, unfortunately. But when you look back, it's funny now on the other side of all this, when you look back, COVID really revealed who is committed. And, the 1 or 2 time a month families, yes, some of them came back and some of that had to do with different leadership, but it really revealed who was truly committed and who it was just their church. So they would come when it was convenient. And that was the extent of it. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had to set limits on our rooms because some of our rooms were like hitting like 90, like our elementary was hitting 90 kids, and we couldn't continue to put more kids in there. And so there was one situation where we had to close a room. That was a policy that was set, and families left the church as a result of it. And I don't blame them in one respect. And at the same time, I feel so bad about it because the whole COVID mess was emotional anyway. Like it just, everyone was doing their best that they could with what they had and trying to make the best decisions based on what they were hearing from, CDC or whoever. And nobody really knew what the right way was to do it anyway. Like, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like some people left, some people didn't. Like, I think it was a mixture for where I was at the time.
Yeah, we didn't have nursery. We didn't have preschool ministry.
Mm-hmm.
We just opened K-5. So I know there were families who they just went to another church because they had some babies in preschool ministry, and we just didn't feel like it was time to open it yet. So,
When you reopened that ministry, did they come back or did they stay gone?
no, they didn't. They just stayed where they were.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I have, I mean, for those of you who were in kids ministry during COVID, right? You probably got a mix like I did of some parents who said, well, so long as we're doing masks or we're trying to distance, we won't be here. And then we had another group of parents who said, unless you mandate vaccines for your volunteers, we're not coming. And I lost both of them because I tried to meet in the middle.
Right.
But what we found was what we had left, right? What COVID revealed in us was who had connected truly with the community and who was more interested in. And I'm not trying to say everybody who left for reasons, left or right, were wrong in leaving, right? I believe that, they're trying to do what's right by their families and trying to obey the Lord. But by trying to be very focused in on the authority of Christ and of Scripture, and not going too far one way or the other, we lost both outliers. But then what we had left was a really solid core to rebuild. And our lead pastor had said, all right, here's what we're going to do. Paradigm shift, everybody. We are a church plant. And even though we used to be 3,500, now we're, which is of course a lot. And now we're 2,000. What a blessing. We are a church plant of 2,000 people already. That's great. Anywhere we grow from here is up. And the type of people that we retained, we're very committed. We're that kind of 80-20, right? You're 20% who do that 80%. We were basically a church made of those people. And what we found was that commitment to Scripture, to obedience to the Word of God, drew a lot of people whose churches show. And again, I don't want to make statements about what any of your churches have done because I don't know. Churches who made very politically oriented stances, and they were stuck having to keep their feet in that realm rather than being more vocal on the Word of God. And so we got a bunch of people who jumped ship from other churches who maybe because of political affiliation didn't feel welcome anymore. We found that we grew a lot simply by trying to do our best to maintain a scriptural standpoint and not jump too deep into the political sphere, which is hard to do because we all get tempted sometimes to really jump in because we've all got opinions. And the Lord has really blessed, I think, that stance. So we've seen a lot of really wonderful growth. But it forced a paradigm shift for all of us, which is like, all right, we're starting over now. Church is different. Thankfully, the Word of God is the same. The Spirit of God is the same. The love of God is the same. Community needs are the same. Spiritual needs are the same. But we have a new opportunity. And so we've grown beyond what our pre-COVID numbers were, which is really strange. And I can't tell you exactly why. And yeah, I think some of that is because we've seen some local churches that have failed, and people have been looking for church community. But yeah, it's been a really fascinating journey these last few years for sure.
And it's still fascinating, isn't it? Just to see. I mean, the fact that I don't remember who said it, that you're still having people come back, from being online. It blows my mind.
We had somebody that we have an online pastor because we have an online ministry, and we had somebody from our area who's online. So they literally can drive here. They came for a tour because they've been online the whole time and they haven't ever been here. And I think they live in Quispamsis. So they live in like 5 minutes from here. And they came for the first time a couple weeks ago, which, yeah. I think
have they kept coming back?
Yeah, and I think there's still
there you
lots
go,
of
right
people
there. That's great.
online, right? There's still tons of people online. And I'm amazed that like we have 5 locations and all our locations were able to stay open, which we didn't have to send anybody, like we were able to keep all our staff. We just had to switch. All of a sudden somebody was doing something else, for a while when everything was shut down. But because in Canada, it was, I don't know if it was any different, but we had no church for like 4 months at all. So I was doing everything curbside. So pick up and online and drop off things on doorsteps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad we're not there anymore, right?
Yeah.
I think, as we think about going forward and retention and kids and all this, my encouragement to everybody would be, have good relationships with your senior pastor, hopefully, because that's definitely helpful. But try to focus in on 1 or 2 things. We've talked about a lot of topics today. And even I was like, oh, yeah, I haven't done that in a long time. But again, focus on where you think God is calling you and run with that. And however many rooms and however many volunteers, just know that, if you're following God and he's leading you, that's what you can do. And obviously you're praying and asking for vision for more. But also understand, I would say encouragement is understand what your limitations are and don't be discouraged by that. You have X number of volunteers. Great. Treat them as well as you can treat them. Maximize the number of kids that you can minister to. And just pray that this is a season, not a permanent fixture in the life of your church. But be encouraged with what you have while still striving for more, not discouraged because of what you don't have.
Yeah. A lot of that, like you're talking about, Chris, is perspective, right? It's so easy for any one of us when there's a Sunday where we get, plus 30% attendance, and suddenly we're the same number of volunteers, but we're swamped with kids to go, oh crap. Because for us, right, administratively, that's a problem. But then we go, wait, that's not a problem. God just brought a bunch of extra kids here. And so training our spirit to react in a different way. I know I fall victim to that sometimes, like, oh man, like if we only could just have fewer kids this Sunday, I'd really like to have an easy one of these days, right? One of our preschool coordinators, they had a super chaotic day a few weeks ago, and she just responded with, wow, like God is really bringing people here. What a wonderful blessing. And that changed attitudes like completely that day. And an overwhelmed ministry had positive experiences and positive volunteer reaction and outlook because the leadership, exemplified it. And that I found challenging to me because it's easy for me sometimes to go, man, like God, you brought all these kids. Why aren't you bringing the leaders? And just thank him one blessing at a time, right? He's thank him for the kids first and keep praying and trusting for the leaders. So for me, it's a lot like, hey, even though deep down I'm stressed, I need to remember that an abundance of students, although that creates, challenges for me, is a huge blessing. And to treat it as such, because your leaders will see how you treat it. The leaders will see every student who arrives on your ministry floor to be a blessing and not a problem to be solved. And parents can see it too, right? It's just, it can be tough to do. But I would say in your attitude, in your leadership, and how you communicate to your leaders that, being swamped is a good thing. I think that really helps set the tone for a ministry, and will help you retain your leaders as well, because they don't see triage all the time. They see they see, I guess, an overwhelming of blessings, right? And I know that sounds semantic, but I do think that there's something to that.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say on the reverse end of that, if you're discouraged because you don't have the tremendous blessing of having too many kids on any given Sunday, I have people ask me all the time, well, do we even bother like starting this ministry or doing this event, or, maybe the VBS, there's only going to be 10 kids there total. Absolutely. If you don't do something, it won't grow, and part of it is your enthusiasm and putting those things in place, regardless of how many come. And also being a part of your bigger church picture, having conversations with all the ministry leaders, building relationships with even senior citizens in the church. I have many that bring grandchildren, and their hearts are huge for them because maybe their children are far from God, but they're allowing them to bring their grandchildren, just networking the whole church, your vision, if you're not the size that you want to be, or if you're just discouraged, just know that even if it's a few that you're seeing each Sunday, God has placed them there for such a special purpose, and you building relationships with them and their parents or their grandparents or whoever it might be, that's contagious. And then they will, it will open doors, I think, to other families that maybe they know, or people in the church, that maybe don't even have a child in the ministry. They see your enthusiasm and they see your heart to reach children, even if it's 5 or 500, it does not matter. They're there. So, just not to be discouraged, because not all of us have that blessing, and it is chaotic when it happens. But if you don't, that's okay too, because God has put you there for a time and a purpose, and to use every advantage you have when you're there.
And I would say that, like, when there's less kids, that provides the opportunity for our leaders to be able to build that relationship deeper and spend more capacity and energy on one more student than they normally would when it's full class too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us too, one class on a given Sunday could be really full, and then another one be very small, because our classes are divided by grade. And so one week, and it's so unpredictable too. I've given up trying to project this, even like based on a class size. Oh, last year's third grader was a huge class. This year's fourth grader's class is super small. I have no idea why. So I planned to have 2 fourth grade classes this year, and one of them is always empty, or they're always getting combined because they're so small. So my teacher's experiences on any given Sunday can change from one feeling the blessings of having a full class, and the other having the blessings of having a lot of good one-on-one constructive relationship building. So, yeah, for me, it honestly varies by class. I've never had a Sunday where every class has been full or every class has been empty. There's always been a little bit of variance there, at least in our small group settings. So our leaders experience that up and down depending on a Sunday. But communicating, yes, the blessings of being full and the blessings of being empty is key. Because hopefully your teachers love kids. Hopefully your teachers love building relationships. Yeah.
Can I ask just a general question? I hope this isn't like in next week's cohort or anything. But speaking of small groups, you said you age by grade. I mean, that's how we've always done things. But we've had this huge influx of homeschool families. And it so far hasn't gotten really messy, but I've had to really think through it a whole lot more, like I have to prep, like I make sure I have that list of what their age is, and I have that conversation with the parents. We're not going to send a 10-year-old, I don't care if they can read on the 12th grade level, we're not sending them to the youth ministry. So I would just love to hear from some of you, how have you approached that? What have you done that worked? Maybe what did not work? So we're all cautioned not to do those things, but it has kind of complicated we actually have right now in our youth group, a boy that he has some learning disabilities, but he's really aggressive. He likes to sit with the middle school girls. He is not going to graduate, but he is going to be 19. But we have another boy in the youth group that's 19 that was retained for good reason, back when he was young. And it's my pastor's like, well, we can't go by age here. I'm like, but we go by age. Like, that's what we have to do, because school is not, church is not about education or those abilities. It's social, emotional, spiritual, and they need to be with the kids their age. So what does that look like for y'all?
I guess I'll jump in really quickly. It is the standard measure, but it's not the end all for us. We actually have a pretty large influx of Ukrainian refugees, and so because of that, I have a first and third grader in our fifth grade class because there's a fifth grader who speaks very good English and Ukrainian who interprets for them. So, we make exceptions for sure, or if there's a child who was held back, basically I discuss with the parents, would they like to be in the class that reflects their school grade, or would they like to stay with their peers? And I'll let you decide when you want to hold them up in that growth. So a lot of that is tailored to the student to make sure that when they're at church, they're thriving. So that's the basic is like based on their grade. And not every school graduates their students from 5th to 6th grade. So we graduate ours from 5th grade elementary to 6th grade middle school ministry. Some, of course, have the overlap, but that doesn't seem to be a problem with us. But yeah, so for us, it's very much, this is the standard, but if you have a cousin who's visiting from out of town and they want to be with their cousin, by all means, you can stay in the same class. Or it's a child's first time and they brought a friend who's in a different grade, feel free to stay in the same class. If they feel super anxious and don't want to leave, then they can be in your class. As long as there's not a huge developmental gap, like first or kindergarten to 5th grade, like that would be a little tougher. Of course, when there's a language barrier, we make the exception there.
Yeah, that's very exceptional because we would never have that here. But we got in trouble with it because we had no policy in place. And actually, one of our pastors that came, his 4th grader was homeschooled, and they put him straight in the youth. And what we saw is that he just struggled. He had a hard time. Yeah. So we had to kind of draw some lines and have those hard conversations, with parents. So
yeah, I've had parents who've asked their kids to move up from preschool early because they were in like gifted and talented programs. I'm like,
Yep.
That's great. I'm really proud of little Danny, but to develop spiritually the way he needs to, we would like him to stay on the 1st floor until he graduates to the 2nd floor with his peers. He'll build better friendships that way. His spiritual growth will be more appropriate that way. And so, yeah, if the kid skips a bunch of grades, we'd love to keep them more where they're developmentally, spiritually, and with their peers, and keep them in that crew.
We also have some homeschool families. So Doreen, I've experienced the very same thing. It's more of a pride of they can really read an adult Bible just fine. And I'm like, that's great. Then maybe they'll be chosen to read in their class, but really it's about developing those relationships. And it's so much more appropriate, like you're saying, Ethan, with their peers. And it's about having those spiritual conversations, both with their leaders and with their peers. And they're just not, first of all, with homeschool kids, very emotionally unready for a lot of that. What I see that they need to learn even more so than the content is how to engage emotionally with people. That's where I feel like they need the most learning. And I know that's a super hard conversation to have with homeschool parents because they want very well-rounded people, but that's where I see that they need the most is, learning how to wait a turn when there might be 8 other kids, when they're used to being first in line. And yeah, so there's a lot of things that they need to learn that they don't always get exposed to that the parents maybe haven't even thought of.
Great questions and answers. Well, I am going to say that this was an amazing cohort. Incredible conversation. Some stuff that came up that didn't expect it, but it was so good and valuable. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for your wisdom, panelists and others who chimed in. And I'm very excited to send this on to other leaders who couldn't be a part of this call today. So my suggestion goes back to what Chris said earlier. Take a couple nuggets from this, a couple of things that you heard, and see if you can make that into your own ministry context, and not. Maybe it's just a learning tool for you. So next week we have our last cohort on March 19th at 1 o'clock. And it's about creating an environment where kids can encounter God's love. And then we're going to talk about worship and partnering with parents. So I'm excited about those conversations. So I appreciate y'all. I love being in this room with you. Again, as I said last week, I wish we were in person, but it's going to happen. But thank you so much. Y'all are awesome. Praying for you guys. Take care.